Ethan Carter always believed that home was more than a structure. It was a sanctuary of memories, hard-won freedoms, and a tribute to a life well lived. A decorated military veteran turned dedicated city official, Ethan had built his perfect retreat in a charming, tree-lined suburban cul-de-sac. Nestled behind his modest colonial home was a sprawling yard where an ancient apple orchard, planted by his late father, burst with the ruby glow of autumn's harvest. These apple trees weren't just flora. They were symbols of his legacy and the quiet defiance against a world that tried to impose rules where heart and history should reign. On a cool early morning, as golden sunlight danced through the leaves and the scent of fresh apples mingled with dew, Ethan was prizing open the back door to prepare his daily ritual, tending to the trees and savoring the silence that allowed him to reflect on past battles and present triumphs. His workshop, tucked in the garage, housed tools for restoring classic cars, a passion that reminded him of simpler, purposeful times. But the peace was about to be shattered. Kerren, the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, strode up the driveway in a crisp blazer and immaculate heels. With a clipboard in hand and a glare that brooked no dissent, she embodied the entitlement of the HOA board. "Mr. Carter," she began, with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes, "it has come to our attention that your property is in violation of several community guidelines. Your porch lights, your landscaping, and even your apple display are not in keeping with the established standards." Ethan frowned as he listened. "My apple trees have stood here for generations," he replied, his voice measured yet firm. "They're part of the heritage of this home. And I assure you, my porch lights are merely welcoming, not disruptive." Kerren's response was icy. "Heritage is irrelevant when it conflicts with HOA policies. You have until the end of the week to make the necessary adjustments, or further action will be taken." Her tone left little room for discussion. It wasn't just the lights, it was everything. The HOA's rules, she insisted, were meant to enforce uniformity and elevate property values. But to Ethan, they were a thinly veiled attempt at stifling individuality and quashing the traditions that made his home a haven. As the conversation unfolded, neighbors peeked from behind lace curtains. Rumors had long circulated about Kerren's heavy-handed management and the undue fines levied on those who dared to challenge her authority. Ethan's heart pounded not from fear, but from indignation. "I don't see how cultivating an orchard, something that beautifies and sustains the community, could be a violation," he argued. "Your rules are arbitrary, and frankly, they undermine the spirit of this neighborhood." Kerren's eyes narrowed. "Rules are rules, Mr. Carter. I suggest you review the HOA manual again. I will be returning with an official notice." With that, she spun on her heel, leaving a trail of haughty assurance in her wake. Later that morning, as Ethan reviewed the HOA guidelines in his study, doubts began to creep in. How could a tradition, cherished for decades, suddenly become a transgression? The apple trees were more than just plants. They were the heartbeat of his property, a living memory of his family's sacrifices. Meanwhile, Kerren's arrival had planted a seed of rebellion. Ethan recalled other instances of the HOA's overreach: fines for minor infractions, demands for cosmetic uniformity, and an undercurrent of bullying that affected many in the community. Determined not to be bullied into silence, Ethan resolved that he would challenge this tyranny head-on. His first step was clear: gather evidence that the HOA's rules, particularly those levied by Kerren, were not only arbitrary, but perhaps even in conflict with local laws and the community's best interests. With his tools for both car restoration and for unearthing the truth, he began formulating a plan. That afternoon, as he walked beneath the apple trees, the gentle rustling of leaves provided a stark counterpoint to the mechanical thrum of bureaucracy. His mind raced with memories of shared laughter, family picnics, and the quiet pride he felt when harvesting the fruits of these trees. Now, each apple symbolized not just a season's yield, but a challenge to an oppressive system. In his heart, the simple act of tending his orchard had become an act of resistance. As dusk fell and shadows grew long over his property, Ethan prepared for an inevitable confrontation. The first encounter had sown the seeds of defiance, one that would grow into a full-fledged battle between an indomitable spirit and a system steeped in entitlement. Kerren might have seen him as a minor inconvenience, but Ethan knew that his home, his heritage, and his very way of life were on the line. And if the HOA demanded conformity at the expense of history and individuality, then it was a battle he was more than willing to fight. The morning after Kerren's visit, Ethan awoke to a sight that made his blood boil, a stark white envelope taped to his front door. With trembling hands, he peeled it away to reveal an official-looking letter. A $750 fine for excessive porch illumination and unsanctioned landscaping modifications. The language was legalistic and cold, yet its intent was unmistakable: intimidate and control. Outside on the neat, manicured sidewalk, Kerren waited with an air of smug entitlement. Arms folded and posture rigid, she glanced at Ethan as if he were a minor delinquent. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. I trust you received our notice," she said, her tone both patronizing and inflexible. Ethan squared his shoulders and met her gaze. "I did, Kerren," he replied evenly. "But I must remind you, the community guidelines are subject to interpretation, and my property is well within my legal rights. I plan to consult local zoning officials." Kerren's smile faded into a steely glare. "The HOA's decision is final. Our rules are established to maintain property values and the aesthetic of the neighborhood." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, laden with unspoken threats. "You wouldn't want to jeopardize your standing in the community, would you?" Unfazed, Ethan calmly placed the letter in his desk drawer. Later that day, he visited the local zoning office. There, a seasoned official assured him that his property, complete with its historic apple trees and carefully curated lights, did not violate any municipal code. In fact, the inspector even complimented him on the tasteful way he preserved his home's character. Empowered by this confirmation, Ethan filed a formal complaint against the HOA's arbitrary enforcement. Back at home, as the afternoon shadows stretched across his lawn, Ethan began gathering the first pieces of evidence. He took photographs of his porch lights gleaming warmly, capturing the gentle interplay of light and shadow that made his evenings so inviting. He also snapped close-ups of the apple orchard, with its sunlit branches and ripened fruit, a living testament to generations of care. Every image was a quiet manifesto against tyranny. Yet Kerren was not one to accept defeat lightly. The very next day, word spread among the neighbors. Inspectors were seen prowling the cul-de-sac, clipboard in hand, scrutinizing every detail of Ethan's property. In hushed tones, residents wondered if this was another of Kerren's power moves designed to squeeze dissent out of anyone who dared to stand up for what they believed in. That evening, as a cool breeze rustled the leaves, Ethan sat on his back porch reflecting on the day's events. The fine was not just a monetary penalty. It was a message from an overreaching authority intent on controlling every facet of community life. And yet, in that quiet moment, with the soft hum of cicadas and the nostalgic aroma of ripe apples, Ethan felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just fighting for his right to enjoy his home. He was challenging an entire system that prioritized conformity over individuality. Later, at a community mixer held in the local park, whispers of Kerren's relentless enforcement reached Ethan's ears. Some residents confided that similar fines had been levied on others for minor infractions. A crooked mailbox here, an unapproved flower bed there. The more he listened, the clearer it became. Kerren's authority was built on intimidation, not on genuine concern for community standards. As the evening progressed, Ethan began to speak with fellow homeowners. "There's nothing wrong with a little personal flair," he argued. "A warm light on the porch isn't a threat, and a thriving apple orchard is a blessing. We all deserve a little freedom to express who we are." His words resonated with many, sparking a quiet murmur of agreement. For the first time, a collective sense of resistance began to form. By the close of the day, the message was unmistakable. Kerren's power was being challenged, and the seeds of revolt were already taking root. Ethan realized that this was only the beginning, an overt declaration that he would no longer bow to arbitrary rules, that his home and his heritage were not for sale. And so, with legal advice in hand and evidence meticulously gathered, Ethan braced himself for the escalating war with the HOA. In the days that followed, the conflict between Ethan and the HOA morphed from bureaucratic posturing to outright hostility. Kerren, determined to assert her iron grip on the community, began to deploy more drastic measures, ones that went well beyond mere fines and warnings. A cascade of false violation notices started appearing on doorsteps, each more outlandish than the last. One homeowner received a citation for excessive natural beauty, while another was accused of historical misrepresentation for keeping a vintage mailbox. Ethan watched in disbelief as Kerren's tactics grew increasingly audacious. One crisp morning, while inspecting his beloved orchard, he found a notice posted to a gnarled apple tree. Unauthorized arboricultural display. Immediate removal required. The handwriting was spidery and official, yet its absurdity was unmistakable. Not only was it a direct challenge to his right to maintain a family heirloom, but it was also a blatant abuse of power. Realizing that the HOA was resorting to illegal moves, Ethan decided to investigate the organization's inner workings. Late one evening, after his children were asleep and the house was silent except for the rustle of leaves outside, he sat down with his laptop and began poring over public records, meeting minutes, and financial documents from the HOA. What he uncovered was shocking. Kerren and a handful of board members had been misusing funds, diverting money meant for community improvements into their personal accounts. In some cases, fines collected from unsuspecting neighbors were disappearing into untraceable shell companies. The more Ethan dug, the more he realized that this was no isolated case of overreach. It was systemic corruption. One board member, who had long seemed uneasy during meetings, eventually confided in him. "I've seen things, Ethan," she whispered over the phone, her voice trembling with fear. "Kerren has been pushing through illegal measures, and when anyone questions her, she silences them with threats. I'm not sure I can keep up with it anymore." The revelation confirmed what Ethan suspected. The HOA was a house of cards built on intimidation, deception, and misappropriated funds. Fueled by a righteous anger and a desire to expose the truth, Ethan began to document everything. He installed discrete cameras around his property to capture any irregularities. Every unusual interaction, every overzealous inspection was recorded. He compiled detailed logs of phone calls, conversations, and even the whispered comments of other residents who had suffered in silence. His investigation soon turned into a full-scale counteroffensive against the tyranny of Kerren and her cohorts. At the next HOA meeting, a stuffy affair held in the community center with fluorescent lighting and plastic chairs, Ethan dared to voice his concerns. Clutching a thick folder of evidence, he stood before the board and the assembled homeowners. "I have discovered that the fines, the false notices, and the arbitrary rules are not about maintaining community standards. They are about control and personal gain," he proclaimed, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "We deserve transparency, fairness, and respect for our rights as homeowners." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some residents, emboldened by Ethan's revelations, began to question long-held practices. Yet Kerren, ever defiant, interrupted with a sneer, "Mr. Carter, you are misinterpreting our guidelines. Your evidence is circumstantial at best." Her words were met with a mix of murmurs and discontented glances. That very night, as Ethan returned home under a tapestry of starlight, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle had just shifted into a more dangerous arena. Kerren wasn't content with quietly collecting fines anymore. She was prepared to use every tactic at her disposal. Rumors began to circulate of eviction threats, sudden property seizures, and even covert attempts to intimidate other residents into submission. It was clear that Kerren intended to squash any resistance by any means necessary. Determined not to back down, Ethan doubled his efforts. Every scrap of evidence he gathered was cataloged. Every shady financial transaction noted. His investigation wasn't just about saving his own property. It was about liberating an entire community from the suffocating grip of an authoritarian board. As he prepared for the coming storm, Ethan could only hope that his painstaking research would soon force the truth into the light, and that justice, no matter how hard fought, would prevail. The tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch when, one seemingly ordinary morning, Ethan awoke to a scene of chaos. His driveway, once a well-manicured expanse, was now marred by deep gouges and the unmistakable smell of disturbed earth. A tow truck was parked haphazardly, its hydraulic arm idling, as if ready to seize his prized classic car. The HOA's excuse? An emergency reconfiguration of community aesthetics that required immediate removal of unauthorized vehicles and modifications. Kerren, clad in her signature blazer and clutching a set of keys as though they were a scepter of power, strode up to the front door with an air of triumph. "Mr. Carter," she declared in a tone that brooked no argument, "the HOA has decided that your recent modifications, including that vintage automobile which disrupts our planned uniformity, are in direct violation of our rules. Your car will be towed at once, and any further noncompliance will result in additional fines." Ethan's blood ran cold. Not only was his freedom being trampled upon, but every personal possession, every relic of his hard-earned life, was now at risk. Yet this blatant overstep ignited a spark of defiance deep within him. "I demand an explanation," he said, voice tight with anger. "My property, my car, my heritage, they are mine by law and by right." The confrontation that ensued was nothing short of dramatic. Neighbors emerged onto their porches, murmuring in disbelief, as Ethan brandished a file thick with legal documents and irrefutable evidence of the HOA's overreach. "Your so-called emergency is nothing but a pretext for control," he told a visibly rattled Kerren. "I have here documents proving that the HOA has no legal authority to interfere with my property or to remove my vehicle without proper notice." The room at the community center later that evening was electric with tension. At the next emergency meeting, Ethan presented his case before a sea of concerned homeowners. With each slide of his presentation, photographs of the gouged driveway, audio recordings of Kerren's imperious directives, and copies of the zoning laws, the crowd's discontent grew. Board members exchanged uneasy glances as Ethan's evidence piled up like bricks in an unstoppable wall of truth. Even as Kerren attempted to deflect blame and assert that the changes were for the benefit of the community, the tide was turning. Several long-time residents began questioning not only her judgment, but her very legitimacy as the HOA's arbiter. "We trusted you to protect our neighborhood," one neighbor whispered, "but now we see you're only protecting your own interests." Emboldened by the collective anger, Ethan announced that he would be taking legal action. "I am not alone in this fight," he proclaimed. "Together, we will expose the corruption and tyranny that have infected our community. I have already contacted legal experts and local officials who are sympathetic to our cause. The era of unchecked HOA power ends now." The evening ended with a palpable sense of unity and purpose. While Kerren fumed in private, her defiant posture cracking under the weight of public scrutiny, Ethan's victory was already echoing through the neighborhood. In that moment, his personal battle was no longer just about fines and regulations. It was about reclaiming the very soul of a community that had long been suppressed by fear. Later, as Ethan returned to his now scarred driveway, he paused amid the chaos and allowed himself a moment of bittersweet satisfaction. The injustice he had suffered was undeniable, but so too was the resilience of a neighborhood ready to stand up for its rights. And as he surveyed the damage, a symbolic assault on his property and identity, he vowed that every crooked rule and every underhanded tactic would be met with unwavering resistance. Kerren's desperation had reached a fevered pitch. Over the past weeks, her tactics had escalated to an almost theatrical level of malice. Now, in one final bid to regain control, she hatched a plan so reckless it bordered on the absurd. With the HOA under mounting legal and public pressure, Kerren decided to call on the police for what she claimed was an imminent public disturbance emanating from Ethan's property. The source of her outrage? None other than his beloved apple orchard, a symbol of heritage that, in her eyes, was an eyesore and a potential hazard. On a blustery morning, Kerren dialed emergency services. "There's a riot at the Carter residence," she insisted to the dispatch operator, her voice trembling with barely concealed anger. The apple trees are attracting wild animals and causing chaos on the streets. It was a preposterous claim, but one she hoped would cement her authority and justify any further draconian measures. As officers arrived on the scene, Ethan calmly stepped outside. Recognizing the insignificance of her claims, he flashed his city official badge and addressed the arriving officers with respectful authority. "There is no disturbance here," he explained. "Just my orchard, an orchard that has nourished my family for decades." The officers, familiar with his reputation for fairness and community service, exchanged uncertain looks with Kerren, who fumed silently on the sidelines. But Kerren was not finished. Determined to twist the narrative, she escalated her gambit by hiring a private investigator to dig up scandalous dirt on Ethan, a move meant to cast doubt on his integrity once and for all. Late one night, while Ethan reviewed footage from the cameras he had discreetly installed, he noticed something extraordinary. In one of the grainy recordings, a shadowy figure was seen skulking around his garage. Ethan quickly forwarded the clip to his legal team, confident that it would serve as further evidence of the HOA's unscrupulous methods. Yet the most dramatic twist was yet to come, a twist that would forever seal Kerren's fate. Unknown to her, Ethan had devised a countermeasure that would not only expose her, but also serve as poetic retribution. For months, Ethan had been nurturing a plan that married his love for his orchard with the natural defense of a local ecosystem. Remember the prized apples? Well, these were no ordinary fruits. Ethan had discovered that by dipping the apples in a special blend of honey made from his own beehives, a secret recipe passed down through his family, the scent would attract a particularly aggressive swarm of bees known for their protective instincts. Late one afternoon, as Kerren prepared for another round of harassment at one of the HOA meetings, Ethan unveiled his masterstroke. With the meeting in full swing and the board members reluctantly gathered in the community center, he produced a basket of his honey-dipped apples. "These apples," he announced, "have been taken from my orchard, stolen as a means to force conformity. Today, I return them to you in the only way nature allows me to, with justice." Before anyone could react, Ethan discreetly set the basket on a table near the entrance. Within minutes, a low buzzing began to fill the room. Unbeknownst to Kerren, the specially treated apples had activated the territorial instincts of Ethan's bees. From a concealed vent outside the building, a swarm of angry bees surged in. The bees, drawn by the irresistible aroma of honey and the memory of stolen fruit, descended upon the room in a chaotic, stinging barrage. Screams filled the hall as board members and a startled Kerren scrambled for cover. In the confusion, Kerren's carefully constructed facade crumbled as she found herself at the mercy of nature's fierce retribution. Outside, as the commotion reached a fever pitch, the police, already skeptical of Kerren's previous claims, arrived to find a scene that defied explanation. Amid the swirling chaos of bees and panicked voices, Ethan calmly gathered his evidence, his eyes fixed on Kerren's unraveling composure. The symbolism was undeniable. The very apples that Kerren had once ridiculed and stolen were now the instruments of her public undoing. In the aftermath, as the bees eventually dispersed and order was tentatively restored, Kerren's final, desperate move was laid bare for all to see. Her credibility, already battered by months of intimidation, was now obliterated by the unexpected yet fitting spectacle. Ethan's quiet, determined smile spoke volumes. Justice had been served in a way that was as natural as it was righteous. The fallout from the bee incident was swift and devastating. In the days following that chaotic HOA meeting, the community's tolerance for Kerren's tyrannical rule evaporated completely. Homeowners, who had long suffered in silence, found the courage to speak out. A special meeting was convened, and armed with Ethan's meticulously documented evidence and first-hand accounts from neighbors, the residents voted overwhelmingly to expel Kerren from the HOA board. In a dramatic turn of events, local authorities, prompted by the mounting evidence of corruption and illegal practices, launched a full-scale investigation into the HOA's operations. The once feared organization, now revealed as a facade for personal gain and abusive power, began to crumble from within. Kerren's personal assets were scrutinized, and her misuse of funds came under harsh legal examination. Public humiliation was inevitable. One by one, board members who had once been her silent partners distanced themselves, fearful of the legal and reputational consequences that now loomed large. On a brisk morning that seemed to mark the end of an era, Ethan was invited to a community town hall meeting. In the crowded room, with neighbors hanging on every word, the news was announced. Kerren was officially removed from her post, and the HOA was subjected to steep fines and a mandate for complete reform. "Today," declared the meeting's moderator, "we reclaim our community from tyranny. No longer will we allow personal vendettas to dictate the rules of our home." For Ethan, the victory was bittersweet. The battle had taken its toll on him, a toll measured not in dollars or fines, but in the loss of innocence and the scars of relentless injustice. Yet as he listened to neighbors recount their own stories of oppression, he felt a profound sense of validation. His fight had not been for personal gain alone. It was for every resident who had ever dared to dream of a community built on fairness, respect, and individuality. Outside the town hall, reporters and curious onlookers swarmed the steps, eager to capture the moment of Kerren's public downfall. Photographs and videos of her leaving the building, head bowed and expression shattered, spread like wildfire on social media. The narrative was clear. The HOA, built on the back of arbitrary rules and bullying tactics, had finally met its match in a man who refused to back down. Ethan, ever the quiet hero, watched from a distance as Kerren's reputation disintegrated in real time. Neighbors congratulated him warmly, their voices echoing with hope for a future where community spirit outweighed authoritarian dictates. As he sipped his coffee on that fateful morning, the familiar hum of his porch lights and the rustle of apple leaves filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. The HOA had crumbled, and with it, the reign of fear had come to an end. In the weeks that followed Kerren's dramatic expulsion, the legal ramifications for the HOA were swift and uncompromising. Local prosecutors, bolstered by Ethan's comprehensive file of evidence, from illegally imposed fines to documented corruption, filed charges against several board members. A class action lawsuit was launched by a coalition of homeowners, determined to reclaim not only their rights, but also the funds that had been siphoned off through unjust penalties. Courtrooms buzzed with testimony as one by one, former board members confessed to turning a blind eye or actively participating in the mismanagement of community funds. The trial became a high-profile symbol of resistance against overreaching bureaucratic authority. Ethan, now a respected community advocate, took the stand to recount the months of relentless harassment, the absurd fines, and the final incident that had shaken the foundation of the HOA. His calm, measured testimony was a stark contrast to the chaotic spectacle orchestrated by Kerren, and it resonated deeply with the jury. As the case unfolded, the presiding judge made it clear that no one was above the law. "This court will not tolerate the abuse of power," she declared in a resonant tone during sentencing. The HOA was fined heavily, and strict oversight was ordered for any future community association activities. The verdict sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, vindicating every resident who had been forced to live under an oppressive regime. For Ethan, the legal triumph was not just a personal victory. It was a testament to the power of collective action. In a final move of symbolic retribution, he made a public statement. "Today, we reclaim our community. Today, justice prevails over tyranny." The statement, widely covered in local media, cemented his status as both a whistleblower and a guardian of community values. As the courtroom emptied and the echoes of the judge's words faded, residents felt a renewed sense of freedom and responsibility. The legal collapse of the HOA was not simply the end of one corrupt organization. It was the beginning of a new era for the neighborhood, one where every voice would count, and where arbitrary power would never again be allowed to silence the spirit of community. With the HOA in legal ruins and her allies fleeing one by one, Kerren found herself isolated and increasingly desperate. Public humiliation was inescapable. Once revered for her austere enforcement of the rules, she now became the laughingstock of every block meeting and neighborhood barbecue. In the weeks following her removal, Kerren's personal life began to unravel. Rumors of financial mismanagement turned into hard evidence. Her lavish lifestyle, funded by misappropriated fines, was exposed for what it was: a house of cards built on deceit. Neighbors recounted stories of Kerren's petty outbursts and how she once dismissed a resident's heartfelt explanation of family heritage as nonsense. Now, that same resident watched with satisfaction as Kerren's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her car was repossessed, and even her longtime husband, a man who had once shared in her grand delusions of authority, filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and her abusive need for control. One gray afternoon, as Kerren slumped into a sparsely furnished apartment provided by a sympathetic creditor, she was spotted by Ethan on his way to the local market. Dressed in a worn-out blazer that once symbolized power, she looked lost and diminished. Ethan couldn't help but offer a wry, almost pitying smile. "I hope you like following the rules now," he said softly, a remark that resonated with poetic justice. The irony was not lost on the community. Here was the woman who had once enforced conformity with an iron fist, now reduced to a cautionary tale of what happens when power is abused. Every public encounter with Kerren became a reminder of her downfall, a daily spectacle of poetic retribution that validated the fight for justice. In hushed conversations at neighborhood cafes and over backyard fences, residents joked that Kerren's greatest crime wasn't the fines or the illegal inspections. It was her stubborn refusal to see that true leadership meant serving the community, not subjugating it. And with every new day, her image as the tyrannical HOA Kerren faded further into ignominy. Some months later, peace had finally returned to the neighborhood, a peace hard-won and deeply cherished. The oppressive weight of the HOA was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of genuine community collaboration and mutual respect. Ethan Carter, once the reluctant hero, now found himself celebrated as the catalyst for change. His porch, still aglow with warm light each evening, had become a symbol of liberation and a gathering place for neighbors to share stories of resilience and hope. On one particularly bright afternoon, as the neighborhood organized a modest block party to celebrate their newfound freedom, laughter and music filled the air. Children ran between clusters of apple trees, their joyful shouts mingling with the rustle of leaves. Neighbors brought potluck dishes and homemade desserts, many of which featured the apples from Ethan's orchard, a living testament to their shared victory. In a quiet corner of the celebration, a friend of Ethan's handed him a playful violation notice, printed on crumpled paper. The phone notice cited an absurd infraction, excessive joy, and unapproved community celebration. Ethan held it up, a twinkle in his eye, and declared to the assembled crowd, "It seems the spirit of our community still finds ways to keep us on our toes." Laughter erupted as the crowd cheered in agreement. For Ethan, the final mic drop was not in grand gestures or lavish speeches, but in the subtle, steady return of everyday freedom. The apple orchard, once a battleground for clashing ideologies, had become a living monument to the resilience of a community that refused to be cowed by authoritarian rule. Neighbors, now emboldened by their collective triumph, vowed to safeguard their rights and their heritage, ensuring that no single individual could ever again impose their will with such cruelty. As twilight settled over the block party and stars began to twinkle above, Ethan sat on his familiar porch, a contented smile playing on his lips. The night was quiet except for the soft hum of nature and the gentle murmur of happy voices. In that peaceful moment, with the echoes of a hard-fought victory lingering in the cool air, he knew that justice, though hard-won, had indeed prevailed. And so, as the community celebrated a new chapter defined not by fear, but by unity and hope, Ethan Carter's quiet rebellion had forever changed the fabric of the neighborhood, reminding everyone that when you stand up for what is right, even the smallest apple dipped in honey can spark a revolution.